Hi everyone, this is Khushboo Chokshi and today we'll be discussing the past exam questions asked for your interpretation of statutes. So one thing important to note for interpretation is that in interpretation the questions asked are all theory questions. There are no practical questions as such that are being asked. So only theory questions are being asked. The concepts are there, the primary rules, secondary rules, those are the things that you have to remember, but otherwise also the chapter is quite generic and it's easier for you to answer the theory type of questions unless you are extremely clueless about the rules of interpretation, what is primary, what is secondary, how are definitions or foreign decisions used. You are completely unaware, then it may be difficult for you, but if you have read these concepts, if you know these concepts, you can write it in your own words and it will be much easier to write. Also, there are a few legal maxims, around 8 or 9 legal maxims which are covered in this particular chapter. It is advisable to remember to memorize these legal maxims and use whenever the exam questions are being asked, so that it further enhances the quality of the answers that you are writing. Now, starting with the questions which are being asked, the file that I'm reading out from will be shared on the Telegram channel. So if you want to download it, you can download it from there. Now, starting with the first question, differentiate mandatory provisions from a directory provision and what factors decide whether a provision is directory or mandatory. Now, this is also a mix of your General Clauses Act where you do the shall and may. Similarly, here mandatory is something that you have to do, directory is something you may or may not do, but it may also be used interchangeably is what we will write. Grammatical interpretation. What are the exceptions to grammatical interpretation? Again, a very generic question that you have to read the grammatical interpretation as it is, but if it is not making sense or it is creating any confusion, then you will read the exceptions to the you will read, like you'll go beyond the letter of the law and you will understand what is the logical explanation, and then you will not read the grammatical explanation if it is not making sense or if it is ambiguous. What is a document as per Indian Evidence Act? Again, something that we have studied, that it is any matter expressed or described upon substance by means of letters, figures, words, and which can be used for recording that particular matter will be called as a document. Explain the provision. Short note on provision and explanation. The provision is something which has been asked time and again. Provision is something which is carving out or removing something out of that particular clause. Explanation is further enhancing what the clause is trying to tell you, further explaining the details of that particular section. Mischief rule for interpretation of statute. Give 4 matters it considers in construing the act. So mischief rule, hidden rule, whatever you want to call it, there are 4 questions being asked. One is what was the law before making the act, why the law was that, and what was the mischief that it did not provide for, what was the remedy that the act had provided, and what was the reason for remedy. These are the 4 questions that are going to be asked. Mischief rule has different name, that is the Hayden's rule also. Then you will have to also remember the other names because they can ask you any name, but you should know what they're asking. Please don't make your own rules of interpretation. How dictionary definitions can be of great help. So normally definitions are given in the definition clause which is there in section 2. This is an external aid of interpretation. So when you don't have something in the internal aid, you go to the external aid of interpretation and you see what the dictionary definition is trying to tell you. Repeal of provision is different from deletion of provision. Again, favorite question of the institute, repeal and deletion. There is a case study which is there which is explaining that deletion is from a particular date, and when there is a repeal you will behave as if the particular clause was not there at all. So that is the difference between repeal and deletion. So if you remember the case study, you can mention it here. Preamble does not override the plain provisions. So first you will explain what a preamble is, something which defines object, scope, purpose of the act, and then you will say it can be used as an aid to interpretation or construction, but it will not override the plain provisions of the act. How will you understand whether a provision is mandatory or directory? Same question being asked again. It is defined as company means a company incorporated under the Companies Act or previous law. Person includes under Consumer Protection Act. Interpret the nature and scope of above definition. They are basically trying to understand what you understand by means and includes. Means it's an exhaustive definition. It means a particular thing only. Includes is an inclusive definition. It will include other things also. Means and includes, both words are being used, then it will be again an exhaustive definition. So you just have to explain that, and based on that you will explain the particular definition. How will you interpret the term instrument used in the statute? You will say instrument is a legal document which is being used legally, and it will also include a deed. It is a wider term. There is no differentiation between instrument and deed in India, but they are used interchangeably. But instrument is a wider term as compared to a deed. At the time of interpreting the statute, what will be the effect of usage or practice? There are two legal maxims which are covered here, which you will write down. These are basically your secondary rules of interpretation, the second part that you will write down. Explain, write a short note on proviso with reference to the rules of interpretation. Again, proviso, I said, is the favorite question. It has been asked many a times, and you will just have to kind of explain what is a proviso, and that is the answer that's going to be there. Associate words to be understood in the common sense manner. Explain the statement with reference to rules of interpretation. So what is this? So don't confuse this with agistum generis. This is not agistum generis. This is referring to the secondary rule of interpretation, nociter as occi. So that is what is associated words to be used in common sense manner. So please don't mix it with agistum generis and write that answer down. This is the secondary rule of interpretation, the first point that we have. Sohail, a director of the company, not being personally concerned or interested, financially or otherwise, in a matter of a proposed motion placed before the board meeting, did not disclose his interest, although he has knowledge that his sister is interested in that proposal. He restrains from making any disclosure of his interest on the presumption that he is not required by law to disclose any interest, as he is not personally interested or concerned in the proposal. He made this presumption relying on the rule of literal construction, explaining the scope of interpretation under this rule. Decide whether the decision of Sohail is correct. So here he is saying that I am not interested. The act is saying you have to be personally interested. So he is saying I am not personally interested. My sister is interested, but I am not personally interested. So hence I will not make the disclosure. Here if you are making a rule of literal interpretation, you are not giving the intention. The intention of the act is saying that if you have interest in the matter, even if your sister is interested, you are interested in the matter because you will want to do something which benefits your sister and not the company, correct? So your rule of literal interpretation does not help. You will have to go beyond, and you will have to give the intention of the act, and hence even if the sister is interested, Sohail will have to make a disclosure because he is indirectly interested in the subject matter. What is external aid of interpretation? First explain what is the external aid. Those 5-6 points will be explained, and how the dictionary definitions are used as an external aid. Explain the word means and includes, and what are the what does it mean, and what are the foreign decisions, whether they can be used as Indian statute, then again you will say it is an external aid of interpretation. And if the law is similar, you can give reference to it, but it will of course not be overriding what is given in the main act, but it can be used as an aid of interpretation. It is an external aid of interpretation. So these are the questions. As you can see, they are all theory type of questions that are being asked here. You can write it down in your own words. Remember the legal maxim. Do not forget the legal maxim, and always read it properly so that you don't confuse it between two rules and give the incorrect answer. So please read the question properly before you give the answer to that particular question, unless it's a simple question, of course. So I hope this video was useful, and thank you so much. All the best for your preparations.